Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. This month, we'll examine democracy from several perspectives. We'll look at some problems and shortcomings that weaken our democracy, and then we'll look at some solutions and some positive ways to strengthen democracy. Have you noticed a trend at both the national and the local levels? It seems that special interests and governmental officials are concentrating power in fewer hands while denying the public opportunities to practice real democracy. We have big businesses that merge and merge and merge to get too big to fail and less accountable to the public. We have media ownership that's being concentrated in fewer hands, and that limits and reduces the number of different viewpoints that are available that a real democracy would need. Politicians frighten us into making us give up our rights. In September and October of 2008, the federal government transferred more than $700 billion of our money, that's more than $2,000 for every man, woman, and child in the nation, to the gigantic banking industries that had caused the financial crisis. Bush's initial proposal would have allowed his political appointee, the Secretary of the Treasury, to do pretty much anything he wanted with $700 billion, and that political appointee was one of the CEOs, was the CEO of one of the companies that had caused the problems in the first place. And the initial legislation would have prohibited any court in the country from overseeing what decisions they made. Here in Olympia, the city council that's currently in place unilaterally decided, without any public study or anything, to rescind the nuclear-free zone that had been in place since 2005 and that was very popular. And Olympia's new city council seems willing to privatize the views of the precious area of downtown land that we enjoy for the interests of a real estate developer that wants to build buildings that are taller than what the current zoning allows. The public overwhelmingly opposes that rezone, but that doesn't seem to matter to the current Olympia City Council. Case after case after case comes along where people are wondering, do we still have a democracy left? How do we have an impact on the system? And we'll be looking at these kinds of concerns during this TV program, and we'll also be looking for solutions. How can we reclaim our democracy? How can we assert our democratic values and begin practicing them in various sectors of our society? How can we take back our politics, our economics, and our other systems in our society? And what specific things can we start doing at the grassroots level? Well, we have 4 guests to help us grapple with all these issues. They all have fresh insights into democracy and how it works and how to make it better. Terry Zander is a passionate and creative thinker and a doer for real democracy. He's active with Veterans for Peace. He's active with bicycling activities, youth-related activities, and a whole lot of other community-based efforts. And I know from firsthand experience that he's a lot of fun to work with on committees. Gail Johnson has a PhD. She teaches in a Master of Administration program. She's well informed about the theory and practice of public policy. Recently, she's been organizing to restore the Constitution and the rule of law after sustained abuses by Bush and Cheney. Good to have you here. Bob Jacobs has master's degrees in both business administration and public administration. He's worked for decades in public policy at the state and local levels. He served 7 years on Olympia City Council, and he was very popular and very respected as the mayor of Olympia. Good to have you here, Bob.
Thank you.
And Bonnie Jacobs has a master's degree in education. She's taught school. She's conducted training about civil rights for the Washington State Human Rights Commission. She's a well-respected member of the community who has experience in a whole lot of different aspects of community betterment. Good to have you here, Bonnie.
Thank you, Glenn.
So we've got a whole lot of stuff to talk about, and only 1 hour. But it's good to reflect on the sense of what democracy is about, and there are some different perspectives. The root words come from the Greek words that translate into the rule of the people. And the Declaration of Independence in 1776 affirms that we needed to break free from an empire that was abusing our human rights. And much of the Declaration of Independence is a listing of these various abuses from the British Empire. And it says we have a right to be independent when we're facing these kinds of abuses, that the people are in control. And then the Constitution was written some years later, and it was designed with checks and balances so that we could maintain a democracy and not have any branch of government grab too much power. And then before the states would agree to having the Constitution be adopted, they said, wait a minute, we have to have a Bill of Rights that really spells out the rights that we the people have. And so all of these backgrounds make us want to reflect on a profound democracy.
Well, can I interject something here?
Yeah.
I was recently at a government affairs committee of the Olympia City Council, and one of the city council members said in no uncertain terms, we do not live in a democracy, that we live in a republic, a representative republic, and that those people elected to positions have been elected to make the decisions for us. So there is some controversy even amongst our local city council about whether we live in a democracy or not.
Right. And Bonnie, I remember just a few weeks before our taping, you were at a public gathering and mentioned your experience with town hall meetings as democracy.
Well, it was a very important part, I think, and formative part for me growing up, was going to town hall meetings with my dad. And we had a board of selectmen, and town hall meetings were really important and still are, I think, bringing people together. First of all, there's the group who want to make a statement, tell you where they stand, not just the city council, but those that are present. Then there's a group that want to stand in support of that statement and show their agreement. And then there's a third group that come just to have more information that they have not received from the media, that they have not received from whether it's newspapers or even their next door neighbor. They want to hear what other folks in town that they respect, that they know and like, have to say to help them make up their mind, make a determination.
Bonnie, where was this?
Massachusetts.
And you grew up there?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Glenn, I think it's important to remind ourselves that democracy is a very recent innovation. The first large-scale experiment with democracy started here about 230 years ago. It is not certain that democracy will survive or is the best form of government. We're still working on it.
And that's the sense that we have in exploring this during the program, including not just in the political sphere, but these democratic values. What sense do they make for the economy or for other aspects of our society? And it seems like we have a couple other aspects of democracy that seem mutually contradictory. One is this sense of the rugged individualism, this American value of the rugged individual against everybody else. And the other is the sense of the democracy for the public interest, the commons, that several of you have talked about when we were preparing for the program, that we're all in this together. So we really have to sort through what we mean. It would be wonderful to have a good, rich conversation or multiple conversations about what kind of democratic values do we have.
Well, one of the things, Glenn, that Bonnie refers to is the town hall meeting, and I actually hosted that meeting and am planning to have more of those, because what I see is without a place for us to talk to each other, listen to each other, and espouse different kinds of opinions, we don't know who we are or where we stand on things.
Yeah, and there's the old notion that says if you get the marketplace of ideas, you get lots of viewpoints expressed, the truth will somehow emerge from that as people say, oh yeah, that's it.
Or at least the common good, as we talk about it, somehow gets to bubble up, and maybe there is some wisdom in that somewhere.
One of the things that's been concerning me for quite a long time, not just the last 8 years, but for quite a while, is that more and more people in the country seem to feel that the federal government no longer represents them, that although over the years we've had federal regulatory agencies trying to protect the public interest, the Food and Drug Administration and Environmental Protection Agency and stuff, it seems as though those regulatory agencies have been captured by the very industries that they were supposed to be regulating, so that instead of protecting us from pharmaceutical companies that might take advantage of us, they end up protecting the pharmaceutical companies from public scrutiny. And instead of protecting the environment from polluters, they're protecting the polluting companies from environmentalists. And that's a troubling thing, even before the abuses that you had worked on about the Bush and Cheney assaults on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Is that, I'm probably not the only one that has that concern about the trend at the federal level.
Well, I'd say that, at the federal level, we've seen, really since Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, we've seen a tremendous amount actually of deregulation. We've seen, and in the last 8 years, not only have we seen deregulation, but we have seen the White House really trying to impose its perspective on the agencies, including telling them, that they couldn't report certain things that scientific research committees have found, that they've stopped that. There's a tremendous amount of whistleblowing in the federal government of reporting abuses. But yes, it does feel like it is out of control, and certainly the American people are aware of that. I mean, their disapproval rating of Bush is the highest disapproval rating of any president ever at this point, and Congress is not exactly loved either. I mean, their approval rating is 11%, 15%. So there's something that's happened that the American people are feeling that the government is not on the right track, the country is not on the right track, and that your elected officials and those that work for them are not responsive.
And I think it's not just the present administration. I mean, you mentioned that the Congress isn't well liked either, and it's both Democrats and Republicans. So this is not a partisan issue. This is a issue that goes beyond partisanship to the very heart of whether the people who are making decisions are part of the same country that we live in.
Exactly.
And we're seeing this this sense come out with the bailout of these giant financial institutions that made really stupid and decisions about what to do with money, and quite greedy ones. And then when their stupid decisions crapped out, they came to the government. They came to the people, went to the government, and said, "Have the people bail us out." After all these years of saying, "Deregulate us," and Clinton, when he was president, pushed through the repeal of some banking regulation, and it's been both parties, as you've been saying.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems as though this current thing is yet another example.
It's
The public sense that.
It's in some ways it's a great example, or it's a sad example. With a bailout, they had massive amounts of emails and phone calls to Congress in opposition. The senators and representatives were saying they got more calls and emails in opposition than on almost any other issue. People were really opposed to this bailout, and yet it happened. And it was both Democrats and Republicans. It was not partisan, but that was astounding that there could have been that kind of grassroots protest that was completely ignored.
You mentioned when we were on the phone preparing for the program, you mentioned in relation to this notion that some of those entities were too big to fail. You had a quotation from Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, Bernie
an
Sanders,
independent in the Senate.
Yes, from Vermont, also has town meetings. Basically said if a corporation is too big to fail, then it's too big to exist. And I take that basically to mean that if a corporation is so big that if their failure is going to topple our economy and do that much harm, they really should not be able to exist. They need to be broken up into smaller entities, and they need to be regulated so they don't make the kinds of crazy financial decisions that brought us to this particular downturn in the economy.
And yet, as Glenn said, I'm sorry.
I think it's important to remind ourselves that these kinds of abuses happen in all spheres. I remember a direct parallel to this when I was the budget analyst for higher education in the state of Washington about 30 years ago. The professors at the University of Washington, I believe it was, had managed to convince the legislature that they could take some of their retirement money and put it in the market instead of in these very stable securities. And so that way, if the market did better, they'd get the extra money. But they convinced the legislature that if it went down, the state, the taxpayers, would make up the difference. Direct parallel. These are not nasty corporations. These are good people, college professors, looking out for themselves.
Yeah. So
you privatize the
the profits.
the profits and
Yeah.
you socialize the risks.
Right. I want to follow up with something that you had mentioned on the phone also, Gail, and then we want to get into some local issues. There's a woman named Naomi Wolf has studied some of the steps that Mussolini and Hitler and some other people have done when they took an existing democracy and basically closed it down for their own power aggrandizement. And I wonder if you could summarize a few of Naomi Wolf's main points. What kinds of things did these folks do?
Well, basically, I mean, one was to have an external or an internal threat so that you could generate the fear to get people to move away from democracy towards more control by the government. You have increased surveillance of the citizens. You have secret prisons where you can do torture. One of the others was, let's see, she had 10 of them. I'm not sure I can remember all of them.
Controlling the press.
The controlling the
one.
press, which we have not so much from controlling the press from the government side as much as we have corporate control of the press so that we don't necessarily have the free range of information. The idea that if somebody dissents, they're considered treasonous.
Yeah.
That people can be arrested and placed into these prisons without due process.
Wait a minute, so far we're 5 for 5.
Right.
Yeah,
And
it's-
she's got 10 of them, and they all line up. It's amazing.
It's
Is
really
this like the stars all in the same?
the stars
Yeah.
Line
it's
up
the
and-
stars all in alignment that have moved specifically in the last 8 years, and of course the suspension of the rule of law.
Yeah.
And we've moved in those directions over the last 8 years, and she's concerned that we are looking at what could be the end of America as we know it.
Yeah, and she makes a strong, compelling case. I want to mention, she's written a couple of books. It's Naomi Wolf, and there are 2 websites that she is very supportive of that we want to mention to the folks. One is the American Freedom Campaign, which is www.americanfreedomcampaign.org. And I got the impression she's one of the founders of that or one of the principal organizers there. And then the other is the Center for Constitutional Rights, and they've done just a great job for quite a number of years. And that's www.ccrjustice.org. It was founded in 1966 by attorneys who had been working in the civil rights movement in the South, and they're trying to use the law to protect civil rights, human rights, and they've been at it now for over 40 years. Let's talk about a local concern. Here in Olympia, we have a controversy that, again, has just really enlivened the public to say, wait a minute, we want to protect our interests. And it's really about democracy as we see it in a broad way. And that has to do with the isthmus, the downtown, the waterfront that we all know and love and enjoy. Tell us about what's happening with the tall buildings.
Well, we have some illustrations, and if you would hold that up, we'll start with the current situation. That's the current situation from the law enforcement officers' memorial behind the Temple of Justice on the Capitol campus. The blob in the middle is the Capitol Center building, the building that everyone loves to hate in Olympia, which we can all agree never should have been built. Well, if you really hate that, you're going to love like 4 times that or 12 times that, depending whether you're looking at view blockage or mass. So let's look at the current proposal. This is, the second one. Yeah, the other one.
Oops.
That's it. This is from essentially the same spot, what the new buildings would do to us. We knock out a good bit of the view from the Capitol campus of the water. And then this is a proposal by a private development corporation called Triway. And by the way, their proposal to add extra height to the existing zoning, which is only 3 stories, is in parallel with 3 other proposals of exactly the same nature, 2 on West Bay Drive and 1 in Tumwater. In all 4 cases, they're asking for extra height. This is a very old trick of developers to buy land cheap because it's zoned at low heights and then get it rezoned for an instant profit. And then the next one, Glenn, this is the vision that most of us would like to see. Let's just take away the Capitol Center building and make a park up the center of the Isthmus, which would essentially be an extension of Heritage Park 1 block to the north. And that's what we're working on right now and organizing for. The city has agreed to study this alternative, and we're starting to raise money for that alternative. The way the city got to study it is citizens circulated an initiative petition. We have initiative at the city level, just the way we do at the state level. If you get enough signatures, you can put something on the ballot. And in just about 6 weeks, we got 4,000 signatures from registered Olympia voters, which is absolutely astounding. This is the first time in 53 years that we've had a citizen initiative in Olympia. The last one saved Sylvester Park and created Watershed Park. So here we are, parks again. Parks need to go to the people.
It sounds like democracy.
We found throughout the city in all the precincts, including ones that are very conservative in their voting patterns, 80% or more of the people are in favor of examining this option. And yet the city council seems poised about 7 weeks from now to go ahead and
That would be what
rezone
date?
the
We're
land.
taping it in late October, so the
9th of December.
9th of December would be their
That's the
scheduled
scheduled date for final decision. We're
Okay.
hoping that they will see the light and realize that it seems very much like an act of bad faith to rezone that land at the same time when you're studying converting it to a park.
Right.
So
And that's
Bob,
what so many people want, because it would make it so much more expensive and difficult to make it a park.
Bob, should people wait until that date to go to a city council meeting?
Of course not.
Good question, Terry, good question.
Call and write an email, your city council members.
Yeah. So let's give the website for the organization that both of you work with, the Friends of the Waterfront, and that's www.friendsofthewaterfront.org. And then the effort to convert that to a park is another organization, the Olympia Capital Park Foundation, which is at www.olicapitalparkfoundation.org. And that's capital with an OL, not AL. So www.olicapitalparkfoundation.org.
And the city's website is easily found just by searching for City of Olympia.
Yeah.
And you can get all the contact information for
Right.
city council members.
I mean, it seems like an overwhelming case of democracy, the public interest, what the public wants.
I think it is. I think it is. It was one of the most exciting things I have ever done in my entire life was be part of this effort.
Yeah.
We started out with it seemed like everything stacked against us. The newspaper came out supporting the concept of rezone even before it was presented to the public. And pretty much stayed right there with their editorials, with any photographs that you saw in the newspapers and comments, and yet when the citizens understood what was going on and how fast it was being pushed through, it was an amazing effort. And as Bob said, within a matter of 5.5 weeks, this initiative, the signatures were gathered, and the initiative was presented.
Yeah, it reminds me of the public furor that occurred when the conference center, the convention center was being imposed, and the people said, wait a minute, we want to use public funds for public purposes, not have public funds subsidizing this private effort. We don't want to have this thing crammed down our throats without a public vote. I mean, people were expressing opposition to that conference center proposal a few years ago on the basis of really democratic values.
And it's basically the same groups lined up. I mean, the people who are in favor of this rezone are mostly developers and business people downtown and all of their allies, and a relatively small number of citizens. But citizens as a whole, across age groups, across party groups, across all the sections of town, are uniformly opposed to this.
Yeah,
And we'll see if the city council wants to listen or not. I think it was Terry who mentioned earlier, there is a concept of representative democracy that you vote them in and let them go to make the decisions.
And so their attitude is you people shut up now. You had your election, now shut up.
Now shut
We're
up.
in charge.
I do not believe that that's a good model. When I served as mayor, I said over and over again, probably until people got really tired of it, don't stop when you elect us, but stay involved, because democracy works best when people stay involved. We get better decisions, and we get better understanding of our decisions.
Yeah, we need you need the constant feedback loops.
Absolutely.
And I think also in a similar way with the nuclear-free zone that had been well researched and people organized, and in 2005 the City of Olympia had adopted the nuclear-free zone, and then the current Olympia City Council just rescinded it and did not want any public testimony, did not want to go through a process to examine it. They were just going to do it regardless of the public.
And I was at the government affairs. What happened is the city council tasked the government affairs committee, which was 3 city council members, with looking at that issue. There was a small notice in the newspaper. Happened to be that 15 people showed up besides me, and we were sitting around the outside of the table, and they were going to start talking about the issue and deciding what they were going to recommend to the city council. And I said, do we get to say anything? And they sort of looked at me stunned, like, well, no. And then another one sort of like shook their head, and finally they said, well, okay, well, you can say something. It's like, otherwise we were just going to sit there and listen to them make a decision with no input.
Yeah, it seems like on issue after issue, it's a matter of trying to recapture the spirit of democracy, that the Declaration of Independence and the spirit of democracy that says the people really are supposed to be in charge, and the government we create in order to meet our needs. It's not like the government dominates us.
That was where the comment came from at that meeting, where they said, we're not a democracy, we're a representative republic, and you voted us in, and now our job is to make tough decisions.
Yeah, that's not Thomas Jefferson's way.
No, that is so wrong. That is just wrong. And I actually did correct the council person to try to explain to her that, no, the Founding Fathers intended this to be a representative democracy. This is not a republic of philosopher kings who will make all these decisions for us. They never intended that. They use both terms interchangeably, republic and democracy, but they always intended for it to be, yes, we vote people and they do represent us, but they're supposed to also listen and be responsive to our needs, and we get to have a voice. And that's just, I don't know how this has suddenly become this idea that we're a republic and we vote people in and they become kings and queens and don't have to listen to the people. I have no clue how that ever got entrenched into.
But it is often difficult to know where the public is, because it's possible for a private group of whatever stripe to pack council meetings. And this is what our group, Friends of the Waterfront, was accused of at both of the hearings. And it really wasn't until we went out with that initiative, door to door to door throughout the city, that we really essentially did a very broad-based poll. And found, 80%. That's what we found, plus.
Well, we heard at the Washington Center, when they had the big public meeting on this, that we were accused of only the people who oppose things show up.
And until, we didn't know, that might have been true, until we actually went out there. So it is difficult to know unless you've got good polling going on.
Well, the polling is great, and other ways of gauging citizens. But truthfully, for anybody who's done any kind of organizing, it is very hard to get people to show up for anything. And when you get that many people, you just know that you've tapped an issue that there is a real important, there's a real strong feeling about, because it is very hard to organize people to get them to show up at a city council meeting.
And as Bob mentioned, if it's taken 55 years for another initiative to come to the top of the heap, then that should say something about how people feel about something.
Yeah, it would seem that elected officials would need to be respectful of the voters, unless they want to just be one term and get out or get kicked out.
Well, in this case, of course, if they vote this in and if it survives legal challenge, which is a certainty if they do vote it in, the damage could be done by the time they could be replaced. And I'm quite certain they would be replaced if they did that. And that's the mechanism that we have, is vote them out.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of damage can be done until you
That-
can vote them out, and there's some bells that can't be unrung.
That's right. Well, and we're seeing
when
this
it's
at the
done, it's
national
done.
level.
Yeah.
You know, people who've had their lives ruined by being thrown
Yep.
in Guantanamo and tortured in the CIA secret prison. You can't untorture a person.
That's it.
You know.
Well, I guess what we would like to see between now and the decision-making point is that the rezone be set aside. The rezone is really right now, that decision is sort of putting a cloud over the effort to do a study
Right.
in the minds of the
for
voters,
for the
in the
park.
minds of the public, in the minds of those 5,000 people
Yeah.
that signed the. So if they would be willing to set, I'm speaking now to, I suppose, to the city council, but to everyone, if they would just set that aside or postpone it for 6 months or 3 months,
well, and as
so
you
that
would-
a study can
yeah.
proceed with good faith.
Yeah, and as you had said, Bob, if the rezone is done, then that drives up the cost of the land. So if it becomes a park, the people have to pay a lot more for it because the rezoning was done prematurely.
It
So that's-
doesn't really fare well when you say on the one hand, we're going to look at the feasibility of a study, but we've already given the rezone the go-ahead.
Yeah.
How much faith do you have in them that study is going to get any kind of
That's
sincere?
the cloud we're talking about.
exactly.
If they would.
Yeah. In preparing for the program, Terry, we were on the phone and you talked about people's sense of being disempowered as we keep deferring to experts or governments to solve problems for us.
Oh, sure.
Can you discuss some of that? And we're running a bit tight on time, so.
Well, let's just think of the big box that we live in called culture, and let's start with the Bible. And children should be seen and not heard. And then they go to school, and it's sit down and shut up. The teacher's the expert. Raise your hand if you want to go to the bathroom. And then we go into the military, and it's don't ask, don't say anything. I'm going to say jump, and you're just going to say how high. And then we go to court, and the judge tells us to sit down and shut up, or he's going to hold us in contempt. And then we go to the president, and if he doesn't like what you're saying, he'll put you in a 10-foot chain link fence 40 blocks away from where he's talking. And then we say, now, you should be empowered to be a part of this country. And it's, where did that training ever come from? At every turn, it's sit down and shut up. And now we say, okay, and now you're a voter. That's it.
Yeah. So there's some very systemic disempowerment in various steps along the way and in various sectors of our society.
Everywhere.
And what we need to do if we want to reclaim a democracy is to re-empower people in multiple sectors of society.
Exactly.
So,
But it's also, I think, in terms of elections, is another disempowerment that I think occurs, that if citizens feel that they do not have candidates who represent them, they step back and they disengage. And that's not good for democracy. And you have a lot of people, you have half the public or more than half the public who don't even participate in elections, then that weakens democracy.
well, we in this country, we have one of the lowest voter turnout rates of democracies. I mean, other countries have lots of parties to choose from, and everybody can find a party that they can come out and want to support. And here we have two parties that, despite some differences, they still support big business, they still support U.S. empire, they still support a lot of the basic realities, and we don't have parties
Oh, yes, we do.
elsewhere
We do.
that are given viability. They get squeezed out.
Well, I just got my voter's pamphlet, and
Yeah.
it had 8 different parties in it.
Right.
But how many do you see on a debate? You
Well,
can't even get
Yeah, when
third party.
when they have the televised debates for the presidential candidates, they limit it only to the two in the big parties. We don't get to hear from the other candidates from the other parties. And in the debates during the primary season, they kept squeezing out. The media were basically vetoing the candidates that they didn't want to give coverage for, Dennis Kucinich and
Ralph Nader.
and Nader and Richardson and
The Green Party.
and the
Libertarians.
Ron Paul.
Yeah.
at the Libertarian wing of the Republican. They said we don't want to hear from those guys. So it's not the full range that we have to choose from.
So it's
Corporate control.
it's not just the citizens being disempowered, it's people at every level being disempowered.
If people are, if there's that tendency to defer to the experts or governments, you mentioned when again on the phone in that same conversation about a problem with local litter.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, you mean the cigarette butts?
Yeah.
Well, I read a book years ago, little book called Heroes, local or just Heroes, and in it was a story of a guy who walked through his park, his neighborhood park, every morning, and he would pick up litter, and he said he could leave it to the Parks Department because that was their job, but it was his park, his neighborhood. He walked through it, and he just felt like he was going to own it. So I looked around at my city, Olympia, and I said, I don't like all the cigarette butts on the ground. What am I going to do? I can't go around town picking them all up every day, but I can talk to the people who are throwing them down. So I started talking to them when I was waiting at a bus stop or standing somewhere and seeing them flick them into the streets. I would pick them up and chase them down and say, I'm sorry you dropped this. And invariably they would thank me. One woman, I got out of my car at a parking lot, and she threw her cigarette lit into the parking lot, went into the grocery store. So I picked it up, still burning, carried it into the supermarket with me, looked down all the aisles, found her with her cart, walked up to her, handed it to her, still burning, and she thanked me. I said, I'm on to something.
I have an excellent example of the small steps. In the recent effort that we talked about in Friends of the Waterfront, there was one woman who had never stepped out. She'd done a lot of behind-the-scenes work, and so she went and waved signs with us on along the sidewalk. Well, she thought then maybe she could sit at a table down at the farmer's market and gather signatures. Well, then she decided maybe she would like to go door-to-door doorbelling, and that's really tough. Well, she doorbelled a precinct with a friend. Then she requested, could she doorbell a precinct with a city council member who lived in the area? And now she's ready to go and be on the fundraising effort. But it started out waving a sign. So start somewhere, I would say to people, and it is empowering. Just the fact that you've made a step is empowering.
Yeah, in other countries where they have dictators or some oppressive system, people create what they call pro-democracy movements. In Burma, in all kinds of places, they create pro-democracy movements. We would need that here. It seems like there are things that we can do.
I
from the
do. I
grassroots
believe
up.
there's something innate within us that we want to be part of our own destiny, and that makes democracy flourish, and that makes creativity flourish, and it makes initiative flourish. And so when I see democracy slipping away, I do want to reach and grab for it, and in any way that I can, because it's right. I think it's within us.
And there's also a part within us that wants to kick back and have a brewski. And what I see is particularly people who come to this country from elsewhere, poor people for the most part, just work very hard to get educated, to get their children educated. After a couple of generations, it's like we get lazy. Once we are comfortable, we get lazy. And that may be the biggest danger, because we need to stay involved.
So that's
all the good folks who leave state government, retire from state government here with tremendous experience, and then go and play golf,
But it's
are
fun
really
and,
missing one of the things they need to do, and that's stay involved.
it's fun and satisfying. Like your friend who got progressively more involved. I think people who are not involved don't realize how much fun it is to do that, or to have this TV program, or to serve on the crew here as volunteers, running the cameras and the audio and stuff. I mean, all these volunteer efforts that you folks are all involved with, it's fun, it's satisfying, it's meaningful. You know, it's way better than sitting at home watching sports on TV or whatever,
bowling.
in my humble opinion.
I'm not a bowler, but
Yeah, but
I want to just mention to Bonnie that it brings up that Gandhi quote that we hear all the time
Yeah.
of being the change in the world that you want to see.
Right. Absolutely.
and for the well-being of the electoral political system, there are things that can be done. We could have clean elections that are not dominated by big money. And here at the Washington state level, there's an organization called Washington Public Campaigns that is urging this and organizing for this. Their website is www.washclean.org, which is a clever name for, you know, wash clean, but it's Washington Clean Elections. And the idea is that for a few dollars a year from each taxpayer, we could fund elections, state level elections, to provide matching, you know, to provide the funding for election. And the U.S. Supreme Court has said you can't prohibit people from donating, but what this would do, and what Maine and Arizona have done at the statewide level, is provide public funding so that candidates who are not wealthy or don't have wealthy pals or who don't want to go prostitute themselves to the big corporations or special interests or whatever can have a supply of campaign financing. And if your opponent outraises you, then you get more, but you get to be able to claim that you're running on the clean money. And the voters do pay attention to that. And in Maine and in Arizona, the vast majority of legislators now who are elected are running on clean money. And they find that they're more able to pay attention to the voters and the public policy issues rather than be preoccupied with going out to yet another
Fundraising,
calling up rich people and kowtowing to the special interests. And they're getting better legislation. They got one of those states passed something that reins in the pharmaceutical industry, and others have done other great things. They've also had more diverse candidates be elected, lower income people, people with more diverse backgrounds, not so much just the rich, but more minorities and all kinds of
I've heard that
benefits.
the casual sort of reference to that is voter-owned elections.
That's what they're calling it here.
I like that.
Yeah, so it's not owned by the special interests, it's owned by the voters. Anyway, so that's just worth pursuing. And another reform would be instant runoff voting that would allow a diversity of candidates to run, not just limited to two parties. And so that you can rank, it's also called ranked choice voting, where you have like 5 candidates on the ballot and you go, well, I like this one first, this is my second choice, here's my third choice, here's my fourth choice, and I won't even consider that 5th one. And then now we have this thing where people feel like they're going to waste their vote if they vote for what they really want, and they have to go for the lesser of two evils. This lets you vote for what you really want in ranked order priority, and then the votes get recalculated, dropping off the lowest one each time until we end up with somebody with a clear majority. But it allows you to vote for what you really want,
Right.
and not for lesser two evils to settle for. And that allows for a richer diversity and better public exchange of viewpoints and information.
And again, I think this is a topic where if we had a town hall meeting or public forum on this topic, it could be explained to people, because when we get into this voter third party or fourth party or will my vote count, it confuses people. They don't know exactly how that works or what
Yeah.
it means, and it takes more than just a little tagline.
Yeah.
It takes really understanding it.
There's also a question of time here. If a U.S. representative has to raise $1 million every 2 years, and I'm sure it's more than that now on average,
Yeah,
that's $10,000 a week,
yeah,
every week
yeah.
of every year. And so when people can break it down that way and think about it, what is your U.S. representative spending his or her time on?
Yeah.
$10,000 every week
Yeah.
just to get $1 million.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not what I want them to spend their time
Right.
on.
And what
And from whom?
yeah, and what promises and commitments are they making that foreclose them from considering things that we may want them to do because they've already had to commit themselves to something else?
And meanwhile, they vote on bills they haven't even got the time to read.
Right, but they're out there raising the money. Tell us, we're running a bit tight on time, but I want us to consider the shock doctrine that somewhat pertains to what we're talking about because it's something that seems to be happening. Tell us about it.
Okay, well, the shock doctrine is a book written by Naomi Klein, and basically she's saying that whether there's a natural disaster like Katrina or a man-made disaster like Iraq, that it provides this window of opportunity to make dramatic changes in the political and economic systems so that they can privatize all the natural wealth of a country, they can deregulate everything, totally create a free market. They would cut taxes and they would cut social service spending so that you would be left with a bare bone minimum government. And this would be total, it's sort of radical capitalism, total free market, no controls. And so it ties a little bit in with what Naomi Wolf was saying, is you create this fear and this shock and awe so that people are disoriented. And so the government and the large corporations who are pulling the strings, Milton Friedman is the economist that gets credit for this particular doctrine, they can radically transform the economic system. And the result has tended to be a lot of poverty, high unemployment, and diminishment of democracy, because democracy cannot exist when you have this radical free market economy.
And so when in was it 72 or 73?
73.
When the elected democratic government of Chile was overthrown because Nixon and Kissinger and some big corporations and the Chilean military didn't like the guy. The CIA and other folks overthrew this, and they imposed upon Chile this radical free market thing. They put General Pinochet in power,
Right.
and they took this whole thing and they just plunked it down there, and it was like instantly everything was privatized and it was all ready to roll. Same thing in Iraq with Paul Bremer. We overthrew the government. Everything got whisked away, and they had a blank slate to create a whole new thing on, and they just imposed all that, along with the other. So the shock and awe was not only just the military barrage, but it was shock and awe in terms of this total disorientation of the population
But wait a minute.
and the culture.
Wait a minute. We've been told over and over that what we're doing in Iraq is actually creating democracy.
And that's the euphemism. See, that's the euphemism, and of course it's not, but it's imposing. They confuse capitalism with democracy.
Well, they talk about freedom. We want
Yeah.
freedom. And what they really mean is freedom for the corporations.
Yeah.
That's what they mean.
But
And that happened in New Orleans
Yes.
with Katrina. When Katrina hit and they were starting to figure it out, Milton Friedman, the economist, came in and said, what an opportunity to privatize the
Yeah.
schools. And that's what they did.
Yeah, the school's been shut down and converted to charter schools, private schools. The public hospitals have stayed closed. They got rid of a lot of the black people. They moved them out, and they're gentrifying it and bringing in white people. And they got rid of the public housing. They demolished public housing, and it's gentrified for whites. And they're trying to make this sort of more of a tourist destination that white people will like. But it's this massive elimination of all of the public infrastructure,
Right.
and this imposition of radical free market private stuff. It's quite startling when you look at all the different sectors that they've done that to. And it's very deliberate.
And it is very deliberate. Iraq initially I thought was just total incompetence once we got in there and what happened. And now I'm seeing it saying, no, this was deliberate.
Yeah.
This was intended to get the wealth of the Iraqis. Now, what she also says is shock doesn't last forever, and you will see pushback, and we are seeing the pushback in Iraq because they are, we have the insurgents, and they're saying they had a rally that had 50,000, I believe it was 50,000 Iraqis protesting the U.S. occupation of their country, which is astounding in that situation to see that many people.
When we were preparing for the program, several of you mentioned that this is not really a partisan matter. These are systemic problems. So I know, even though along the way we've made references to people of whatever parties, it's not partisan. These are systemic things, and we need to get at, the guts of it, the systemic problems. We're running quite tight on time, but I just want to lift up for people possibilities of thinking about. We've talked about democracy and trying to get to the heart of these democratic values. Wouldn't it be fun to explore these and have them applied to how we run our economy? What would economic democracy be like? What would it be like if we really valued democracy in how we handle media, instead of having media in fewer and fewer hands of ownership?
That's becoming possible with the internet.
There's been some of that, yeah.
Yeah, a lot.
But there's a fight back from people that want to control and manipulate that. Some of
Sure.
the big internet providers have been kind of monkeying around with who gets preference and faster speed versus things that they don't.
That
things
is
that
so
don't agree with
closely
their.
tied, democracy and a free press, and facts as differentiated from opinion. And it's so important what should be and what has happened
Yeah.
recently.
So it would be fun to play with if we had more time, or people can do this at home, was get together with some friends and think about what would real democracy be like in the economic system.
Oh, Glenn.
The Olympia Food Co-op, it's owned by members and run by consensus among the staff.
You just invented a new board game.
But,
I can see us playing it around the kitchen table now. Democracy.
yeah.
Three,
Okay.
three marks, and I get to go to a free speech zone.
But wouldn't it be fun to have real democracy in the media, and democracy in the educational system? And so it's not just to sit down and shut up, the teacher's the boss model.
Well, you're talking about Evergreen State College now.
Yeah. What other? We have just a couple of minutes left, but I want to see. I know when we were talking on the phone to plan the content for the program, each of you had some perspectives and remedies and helpful steps for enhancing democracy, or things that people could do. Can we just toss out a few of these quickly, because we're quite tight on time, Bob?
I would say basically two things. Be involved. We've got to, in our own self-defense. And the other thing is be open to nuanced understandings of issues. Things are not always the way they seem.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned when we were on the phone about the special interests, you said that some of us are special interests if we're working to protect the environment or a human rights issue. That's a special interest. We're not in it for profit, but there are special interests that are not all bad.
There are private-oriented special interests and public-oriented
That's
special
right.
interests.
Other helpful suggestions, next steps?
Well, there's always, the old think globally and act locally.
Yeah.
And take a small step. I mean, I mentioned the example earlier. Start by waving a sign.
Yeah.
Stretch, and don't assume people have already thought of your idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
You may have something that you can bring to a discussion or to a city council person that they haven't thought of yet. So
Yeah.
don't hesitate based on the maybe some of our training of pipe down.
Yeah. You also had mentioned on the phone the thing that Thomas Jefferson has said, that people are, when people criticize and say, well, the people don't know enough to make the decisions, and Jefferson said, well, don't take away their decision making, give them more education so they can make the decisions.
When you think of they say the pulpit that the President of the United States has, or that a mayor has, or a governor, to educate the people in their domain and their constituents. It's a marvelous opportunity to do good.
Yeah, I think about also the World Social Forum has this slogan that says, "Another world is possible." So it's fun to have creative openness. I know you're real good at that, creating kind of open possibilities. What if we did this?
Well,
What
yeah.
if we did that?
Well, tag on to Bonnie's notion of getting involved, people could just go to city council meetings. That would be a wonderful thing every Tuesday night. They don't have to be involved in that issue, but they can go there and stand up for 3 minutes and talk about anything they want to, and that's easy.
Or just observe.
Or just observe, sure.
The city council, the port
Right.
school board,
Yeah.
which
Yep.
hides itself away very successfully.
Right.
Yeah, we do
All
a
the
poor
boards.
job of educating
Yeah.
each other and ourselves on things, and we
Yeah.
have to proactively go out.
Right. And I'm glad TCTV does cover some of these things. That helps a lot.
But it only covers the ones that want to be covered. And one of the supreme ironies in local government is that the two main organizations that refuse to be covered are the ones that are involved in public information and education. That's the Timberland Regional Library and the school boards.
Yeah.
They are not on TCTV.
Well, there's-
Why?
We need a pro-democracy movement to sort of pry open the lids there and see what's going on. I want to thank you folks for helping out. It's been good to have Terry Zander, Gail Johnson, Bob Jacobs, and Bonnie Jacobs. Elections are only a part of democracy. Elections occur maybe twice a year, but we have 363 other days a year to really practice democracy in very profound ways. The nation as a whole is witnessing a loss of democracy, but we can rebuild it and reclaim it from the grassroots up. It's not about necessarily just changing the individuals at the top, but it's changing the power relationships between the system at the top and all the rest of us and the values that we have, and re-empowering all the people at the bottom. I want to thank the folks who've been watching. For information about a wide variety of issues, you can contact the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at 491-9093. We're all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.